Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Talks Games. Was 2024 a bad year for Nintendo fans? Now, there's a couple different ways we can kind of take this conversation. Was it a good or bad year based on the game's release? Was it a good or bad year based on the kind of events we had, Nintendo Directs, announcements, that kind of thing, right? Was it a good year or a bad year overall? That's what I want to talk about today as we finally have our final Nintendo published release of the year, Fitness Boxing 3, and the reviews are in, and they're not very great, so I wanted to kind of wait and take a look at every game they released this year, and also just talk about all of the major events we had this year, and determine whether or not it was a good or bad year. I think for me, it wasn't, like, particularly great in 2024, especially being a Nintendo YouTuber. However, I think it was just a weird year. I think a lot of people that have the Switch 2 brain rot will say this was a terrible year or something, but I think ultimately that's not true. It was a mid-year, maybe. There was a lot of releases. A lot of those releases are more middling, especially when we look at their Metacritic scores. However, there was still a lot to play. I think it was just a weird one, though, because we had stuff like Another Code, and Famicom Detective Club, and Endless Ocean, and Mario and Luigi came back, and we had a Zelda game where you don't play as Link, and the best reviewed game of the year from Nintendo this year is a remake of a GameCube classic, and then the second to that is a Mario Party game. It was definitely a weird year, so to answer the question very early on, I really don't think it was a bad year. I do just think it was a weird year. So I wanted to sit through and talk about all of the games released, and also, yeah, like I said, the major events that happened. So we'll start with the games that released, going over their Metacritic scores from critics as well as user ratings. So starting off in January, we had Another Code Recollection. This one is sitting at a 73 on Metacritic with an 8.6 user score. I like this game quite a bit. However, I'm not going to sit here and say it's like a masterpiece or anything, it's just kind of like it's just a solid time. It's a solid little story adventure game, it has nice presentation, nice voice acting, but I think for most Nintendo fans, this isn't necessarily what we're used to getting, so it was just kind of like, it's cool that this came back. I really, really appreciate that Another Code got a remake, but I think for most people that play on Nintendo Switch, this is one that's just so niche that, like, it's more niche than something like Xenoblade, right, or even Fire Emblem, so, it's cool, but maybe not the strongest start to the year when, in years prior, we saw Fire Emblem Engage release and Pokemon Legends Arceus and some other heavy hitters in the early months of the year. Another Code is what started the year with a 73 on Metacritic, and that's kind of the theme with a lot of the games they released this year. I'm pretty sure, we'll find out, I guess, but I'm pretty sure almost all of them are in the 70s. So for me, when I compare and rank all the Switch's years, I think 2024 is better for me than like 2020, even though that year had great games like New Horizons and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, and I don't like Age of Calamity at all, but I know some people do. I can look at this year and appreciate the variety, even if it is a lot more middling quality titles, versus a year like 2020, where there were some very high quality titles, but there was just so few of them, So for me, this year is definitely better than 2020. It might rival 2021 for me, but 2021 has Metroid Dread, so that's a very tall order to it to match, as well as Bowser's Fury. So 2024, probably the second worst year of Switch for me, but that's not necessarily like, oh, it's a horrible year. It just means it was worse than these other fantastic years that all had, a serious GOTY contender for me. But yeah, moving on along here, we had Mario versus Donkey Kong here. We get some green on this one. 76 on Metacritic based on 107 critic reviews with a 7.2 user score. Similar to Another Code, this is one that's just like, all right, I guess. It's going to be interesting to look at, like, the play logs they release at the end of the year for me, where they have, like, month by month, what was your most played game? Because ultimately for me, even though I think a lot of cool games released this year for Switch from Nintendo, most of my time was definitely on PlayStation this year, and I think a big part of that is because a lot of the games they released were, like, 8-hour games. I mean, Another Code I was done with maybe 12 hours, 15 hours. Mario vs. Donkey Kong is, like, an 8-hour game, if that even. As we'll get to, Princess Peach is really short. I mean, really the only long games they released were Paper Mario, Luigi's Mansion, and Echoes of Wisdom. Everything else was like something you can finish in a weekend, which is, I guess, something that definitely like had me playing less Switch this year overall, for sure. But Mario vs. Donkey Kong is something that I will say this: if you are a hardcore Mario fan, even if it's a lot of remakes, it was a pretty great year for Mario. I mean, starting in 2023, so kind of cheating here, but we had Mario Wonder and Mario RPG kind of kicking things off, I would say, at the end of 2023. Then moving into this year, we had Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Princess Peach Showtime, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, Luigi's Mansion 2, Mario Party Jamboree, Mario and Luigi Brothership. Like, it was a great year to be a Mario fan, which is why I think also this year maybe feels a little bit more imbalanced for a lot of people, because there was so much Mario, especially in that first half. Well, I guess, I mean, in the second half, we had Mario Party and Mario and Luigi, but the first half was dominated by Mario, and not just Mario, it was dominated by Mario remasters, so It just felt a little unbalanced there. I like Mario vs. Donkey Kong quite a bit, though. I actually really enjoyed playing through this game for the first time. I never played the GBA original, so that was a lot of fun. Splatoon 3 Side Order. This one is odd. I like this game. I do. I like this DLC, but I feel like they didn't do enough with it. You know, it was something where I, finished a couple runs, and I was like, well, I don't really feel the need to go for every, you can do it with every weapon. I didn't feel the need to do that. It's probably because I wasn't actively playing Splatoon multiplayer anymore. I'm sure some Splatoon fans would disagree with me on this, but I just feel like they could have done a lot more with Side Order. In fact, it almost feels like it could have been maybe its own game, like its own Splatoon roguelike spinoff or something like that. That would have maybe been more interesting to see. It has a 78 on Metacritic and a 7.8 user score, so pretty comparable right there. It was good. It definitely wasn't as good as Octo Expansion, though. I love the aesthetic, though, and I love the music, and I like the roguelike elements, right? Like having the chips and all that was a lot of fun. It just once again, it feels like a lot of the games that released this year and a lot of the things, I mean, this is a DLC, it feels like a lot of it just kind of came and went. Side Order I was done with in a weekend, so it really wasn't something that I was thinking about all year long. Same thing here with Princess Peach Showtime. I actually think I like this game quite a bit more than a lot of people. I shouldn't say quite a bit more. It has a 74 on Metacritic with a 6.7 user score. I would say it's like a 7 out of 10, so I guess I'm right in line with a lot of other people. It's a fine game, though. I saw a lot of people saying, like, oh, good feel, can't make good games, and it's definitely not a bad game. It's just kind of like, once again, it's just there. It is a fine game to play with a family member or something like that, right? If you have a kid in your family, I mean, this is a great game to introduce to them as they're learning to play games. But, if you're like a, 25-year-old, 30-year-old adult who plays Nintendo games, Princess Peach Showtime probably going to be pretty underwhelming. But I imagine for a lot of kids this year, this was one that probably, honestly, was one of their better releases. And that's why I expected it to sell better. The game definitely underperformed based on what I expected. Maybe the holiday season sales for this game will be better. But, yeah, this game didn't seem to do that well. But I feel like this is one that was really made for kids. I feel like with good feels other games like Yoshi's Woolly World and Cutthroat World and Epic Yarn, you can play those as an adult and like really just appreciate the vibes and the aesthetic and all that. Princess Peach Showtime has the whole stage play thing going on, but I don't know. It was definitely underwhelming overall. Especially, I mean, Woolly World is one of the best Wii U games, right? And I actually really appreciate Crafted World, and Epic Yarn is one of the best Kirby games. So, I guess it was a step down from them when it comes to their other releases, but I don't think it was a bad game by any means. But once again, another game that you can beat in like 6 hours. So for $60, it's like, well, that was kind of short. Next up, we have their lowest reviewed game of the year, Endless Ocean Luminous, released in May with a 60 on Metacritic and a 5.5 user score. This game, you either get it or you don't. I played it a couple times. I had fun with it, playing with friends, but it's kind of like unacceptable. If you've played the game, so basically you go on these big deep sea expeditions with groups, I think, of 40 people, and that aspect is cool, but you just swim around kind of looking at fish and seeing new different types of fish and like looking for treasure in the sea. When you find certain things, you can like activate a special fish spawning, which it has, some cool community elements, but for $50, this game has like no content, and it was clearly made on possibly the smallest budget of any Nintendo game. Like there's like an AI voice in the game. It's crazy. So I kind of like this game, but also like, nah, dude, this is definitely one of the lowest quality Nintendo releases on the Switch for sure. You can definitely enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. If you just want like a cool, casual little swim around the ocean game, you can definitely have fun with it for sure. But it's really underwhelming. But that's okay, though, because that same month, on May 23rd, we had the highest reviewed Nintendo release of the year, and that is Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, with an 88 on Metacritic and an 8.6 user score. So, Thousand-Year Door is one that I have complicated feelings about. I actually have not finished the remake yet, and but either way, my thoughts being removed from it, this is their highest reviewed game of the year, and it's a GameCube game. And while it is a game that so many people hail as one of the best GameCube games and one of the best Mario RPGs, it is ultimately an old game. So when you're coming into the year and your highest reviewed game is an old game, it's just a little weird, right? Even if that is a really great remake, it's just like, well, I mean, even in 2023, a game that I feel like didn't get much fanfare, but another GameCube game that actually has over a 90 on Metacritic is Metroid Prime Remastered, and that wasn't even one that was like on a lot of people's top 5 lists for Switch last year, because Switch in 2023 was such a dominant force, right? There were so many great things that Metroid Prime Remastered wasn't even like on the list for a lot of people, whereas with this year, Thousand-Year Door is like number 1. It shouldn't be number 1. An old game should never be number 1. You should always have a new game at the top of your 2024 ranking, right? So Thousand-Year Door being the best reviewed game of the year is definitely a sign that while this year wasn't bad, once again, just is kind of a sign that it was a weird, maybe slower year than what we're used to from Nintendo. Not because there wasn't a lot of releases, but because all of the releases were really short and just kind of like middling overall, comparatively to Thousand Year Door. So that being the highest reviewed game is definitely a little odd. In June, we had Luigi's Mansion 2, which once again scored a 77 on Metacritic with a 7.4 user score. I think Luigi's Mansion 2 is by far the worst Luigi's Mansion game. The score definitely indicates that as well, based on people's reception to it. I think people are finally realizing that this game isn't that great. I really wanted to like it and give it another shot after not liking it on the 3DS when I was younger, but I think when you come off of Luigi's Mansion 1, it's just so much worse than that game, and then if you played Luigi's Mansion 3, it is so much worse than Luigi's Mansion 3, so it's really hard to go back to, and the remaster really didn't do it any favors, I don't think, in terms of like being this like an incredible remaster or anything, and redesigning the game in any way. It's really just a pretty bare bones remaster on Switch. And yeah, this is just another one where it's like, I mean, it makes sense. You know, Luigi's Mansion 3 was huge on the Switch. It's one of the best-selling games on the platform. You want to get more Luigi's Mansion on there, and Luigi's Mansion 2 was probably the easiest one to do. Also, it's much longer than the first game, so it made more sense to remaster that and kind of sell it as its own $60 release. But yeah, no, definitely not a highlight of the year, in my opinion. Next up in July, we had a surprise release of Nintendo World Championships NES Edition. This one is sitting at a 73 on Metacritic with a 6.6 user score. This one's a little bit harder to talk about because it is NES games. However, this is a really low-effort release. Once again, you have NES Remix on the Wii U, and that's a really great game. People really like NES Remix. I loved NES Remix back on the Wii U, and as well as Ultimate NES Remix on 3DS. Nintendo World Championships, it's cool to like hinge on the nostalgia of the Nintendo World Championships, but also most people don't have that nostalgia, right? Like, yes, you have a lot of Nintendo adults who are in their 40s, maybe even 50s, or I guess even 30s, who like grew up in that era, but like a lot of Nintendo's audience is kids, but also a lot of people in their 20s who really have no nostalgia for this period of Nintendo. But it's cool for them to honor it, I guess, right? Like, it's cool for them to like look back at that and really just kind of say like, hey, this is a big deal for us. We really, you know, this is an important event in our time. And I say it's not nostalgic for younger people. We did have the 2015 and 2017 championships, but even those were not like a big deal. Let's be honest with ourselves. The 2015 one was certainly bigger than 2017, but the game itself is just speedrun NES games, which, like I said, it's kind of hard to rank that because NES games, I like NES games. Like, I grew up with NES games. I love NES games even. So playing Mario 1, Kirby's Adventure, maybe not Kirby's Adventure. Kirby's Adventure has all that slowdown. Not the most fun to go back to, but playing a lot of these NES games is my point. It's always fun for me to go back to Zelda 1, Zelda 2. So for me, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit when it released. Once again, though, it's one of those things I played for a weekend and then never really felt the need to go back to. Even if you do all of the S Plus ranks on every game, that probably won't take you that long, maybe like 20 hours, like absolute most playtime in this game. I think they do like weekly events. I'm not sure if they're even still doing those, to be completely honest, but I have not heard a whisper about this game since it released in July, and I think that's for a good reason. Next up, we have Emio the Smiling Man, a Famicom Detective Club. This is my favorite release from Nintendo this year. I think Mario and Luigi Brothership probably a better game, but Famicom Detective Club, Emio the Smiling Man really surprised me, and it just kind of came out of nowhere, right? Like, they announced it in July. They had that cool, like, little viral marketing campaign with Emio, who was Emio, and then we quickly found out it was a new Famicom Detective Club game. It released just a month later. That's when I went back and played the remakes of the first two games that released in 2021, and I really like Emio. I think it's a great adventure game, and if you have not played it, I mean, yeah, the score on Metacritic is a 74 with an 8.2 user score. So the fans definitely like it more than the critics in this case. But this is definitely one of those games that you either really like or just kind of feel really indifferent towards. In my case, I ended up coming away from it really, really liking it, but that's not going to be everybody's experience. But once again, a game that has overall like 70 on Metacritic, 74 for critic scores, and it's just another game that you can finish in like a weekend. It's just another short thing. Nintendo had no major games this year that really are going to take you weeks. I guess Thousand Year Door and Brothership are their biggest games released this year in terms of length, for sure, maybe followed by Echoes of Wisdom. But, in 2023 and 2022, we have stuff like Xenoblade and Zelda, even like Mario Wonder. That game didn't take me that long to get through, but it was definitely something that stayed on my mind longer than a lot of the games that came out in 2024. But Famicom Detective Club, shout out. I still think about this game quite often. I really enjoyed it. That is probably my my Nintendo game of the year, as we'll get to when we do like the proper ranking of all other games released this year. Next up in September, we had Echoes of Wisdom. That has an 85 on Metacritic, so their second best reviewed game of the year. That is a good score. However, once again, and I hate to be that guy, but like there is an asterisk on this. That is the lowest reviewed Zelda game I think since Triforce Heroes, and not counting Triforce Heroes, I think it's the lowest reviewed Zelda game since like Spear Tracks or something. Like that is a low score for a Zelda game. It's a good score overall. That's a great score even. An 85 is a great score. Most developers would love to have an 85 on Metacritic, but when you're used to seeing the bar for Zelda so high, to see it come down to an 85, it's like that sticker shock you see when you're in a store, right? Like it's like, oh, an 85, okay. That's not quite what I expected here. I remember reading some people's like, Metacritic predictions for this game, and a lot of people thought it was going to be like a 90 plus, and that certainly did not happen. I think this game has a lot of good bones. I think the world of Hyrule in this game is great. The characters, the story, the graphics, the music. I think there's a lot of great stuff about Echoes of Wisdom, but and as I said it in my review over on my other channel, Echoes of Wisdom is not a fun video game. I think the echo mechanic is actually awful. I think it is genuinely not a good mechanic. It actively takes away from every other aspect of the game. I really strongly did not like the echo mechanic, and as we gotten further away from the release, frankly, I wish I was harsher in that review. It's rough, man. This is the low point of the year for me, absolutely. Even with like Endless Ocean and stuff in there. Is Echoes of Wisdom better than Endless Ocean? Yeah, absolutely. But like, I didn't have expectation for Endless Ocean. I had expectation for Echoes of Wisdom, and it failed to meet that on a gameplay level, which is the most important level. So Echoes of Wisdom, definitely not a game that will make my list at the end of the year. But I know I'm in the minority there. Obviously, it has an 8.5 on Metacritic, and a lot of people do really like it, but still, to the point, lower than what you expect from a Zelda game. In October, we had Mario Party Jamboree. I need to play this one still. I still have not made time to touch this game, so I can't speak too much on it, but it is the highest reviewed Mario Party game at an 82 on Metacritic with an 8.9 user score. It seems like people really, really love this game, and I think this would probably be like, this is the highlight of the year, for sure, from Nintendo. In terms of like new releases, this is like the one game that I feel like everybody got behind is like, this is the best Mario Party game, which is definitely a feel-good moment. But once again, I must say that's what makes this year feel weird. One of the best highlights of the year is Mario Party. And I know I get hate for saying this. I said this back when the game was coming out. It's hard to get excited over Mario Party. Even if Mario Party is great. Like, I know when I play this game, it will be one of my favorite games of the year. It is just Mario Party. There are so many Mario Party games, and ultimately they are all kind of the same with different mini games and different boards. Even if this game is the best iteration of that, it's still just Mario Party, right? Like 2021, it was a similar thing. Mario Party Superstars was one of the best games of that year, and 2021 is similarly isn't one of the best Switch years, We had Metroid Dread that year, like I mentioned, so that definitely props up for me quite a bit, but Mario Party being one of the best games of the year is... Mario Party's not exciting. It's not game of the year conversation material, right? Like, we're not talking about Mario Party, really, when we have these conversations. So for me, even though I haven't, like I said, I haven't played it, I'm sure I will love it, but like, it's just not that kind of game for me. Mario Party should be like a bonus on the release lineup, not like one of the pillars, so to speak. On November 7th, we had Mario and Luigi Brothership, which has a 77 on Metacritic as well as an 8.0 user score. This is definitely lower than I expected. I love this game. I understand it has some pacing issues and all that, and it's definitely a little bit too long, and I know some people have issue with how Luigi is represented in the game. I don't agree with like any of it. One of the main complaints I see is that, oh, you don't control Luigi in the overworld anymore. He's more like an NPC. That's one of the best changes they made. Having to jump as Luigi in the other games, like in like the overworld, is annoying. It just gets old really quick. So I'm glad they changed that. The length, maybe it could be shorter, right? Yeah, maybe you could cut out that third C, in my opinion. That's where it really was slogging for me. But from what I've seen, most people seem to think the opening is actually where the game has a lot of issue, and I did not really experience that at all. Maybe it was the hype of playing it on release day, but you would think other people would have felt that as well. I don't know. I disagree with most criticisms of this game. I think visually it is fantastic. I love the visuals. The little cutscenes between Mario and Luigi and all the other characters are really nicely done, and that's like definitely a highlight of the game for me as well. The combat is a lot of fun with the plug system. Next to Emio, this is definitely my favorite game of the year from Nintendo, and it is a better game than Emio, right? Absolutely. But I think Emio definitely impacted me a little bit more, so I've been thinking about it more, which ultimately I think is why I would put it over Brothership. But they're pretty close for me as the best two releases from Nintendo this year. And then Fitness Boxing 3, Your Personal Trainer, the latest release that no one's talking about for obvious reasons. Nintendo did publish this game. It has a 69 on Metacritic, so really just ending the year with what I think ultimately is just what we've seen with most of the releases. we're talking 60s and we're talking 70s for all of these games on Metacritic, which I know a lot of people say Metacritic doesn't matter, and that's fair. However, it does. It is a good indication of like where things really sit. So for this year's top 3 games to be a Paper Mario GameCube remake, a Mario Party game, as well as a Zelda game that is actually the lowest reviewed Zelda game in the past like 15 years, I mean, that's cool. All 3 of those things are still really good by most people's, kind of opinion, but it definitely makes it feel like a weird year. Was it a bad year? I don't think so. I don't think it was a bad year. There was still a lot to play, even if a lot of those games were more middling and they were shorter than what you expect. But it was still a solid year. It just was very weird, especially when we start talking about the transition to 2025 with the Switch 2. I know people are tired of hearing about it, but this is clearly a year of off titles. This is them waiting. This is them prepping all of their major hitters for 2025, maybe even 2026, as they prep that launch lineup for Switch 2. I think for a lot of people, this year is going to be perceived as worse because there wasn't Switch 2 information. That's like self-inflicted damage, man. Nintendo didn't owe you that. Nintendo never promised you information this year. So to actually say the year was worse because we didn't get Switch 2 news, I feel like that's weird. However, as a Nintendo fan and as a Nintendo YouTuber covering Switch 2 and all the Nintendo news that goes on, it definitely made the year just feel kind of empty because a lot of people were expecting it. Should they have expected it? No, they shouldn't have. However, it definitely just made the year feel weird, and when you look at the sporadicness of Nintendo's presentations this year, that's where it also really kind of hurts, right? You had the partner showcase in February, which got a lot of people excited. It's like, oh, well, if they're doing a partner showcase, they must have like a Switch 2 reveal in March or April. That didn't happen. Then we had the June Direct, which was fantastic. Then we had, Nintendo World Championships and EMU announced on Twitter, which was really weird. Then you had the partner showcase in August, which I think is really where myself and a lot of others really jumped on the Switch 2 like being announced this year bandwagon, because they always have a September Direct. They didn't do anything in September this year. They had that partner showcase at the end of August, but that was it. Then you get to October, which, I mean, I made a whole video about. That was just a crazy month in terms of Nintendo happenings, right? We had the NSO playtest, which was really weird. You had Alarmo announced and released, which is just another weird product they did. Nintendo Music, Xenoblade Chronicles X announced on Twitter. Like, October probably the best month this year to be a Nintendo fan, because on top of that you had, you're coming off the release of Echoes of Wisdom, you have Mario Party releasing, and Brothership is right on the horizon. So I think overall October was definitely like the best time to be a Nintendo fan this year. But it was just a weird year overall, I think. Ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to. It was not a bad year, but it was odd. And it feels like we're really just building up for something. It's funny because a lot of YouTubers were saying that in 2023, like, oh, Tears of the Kingdom and Mario Wonder, we must be building up for the Switch 2 in 2024. That's hilarious to look back on. Of course, I wasn't saying that nonsense. But now it really does, because it's like, okay, all we know about for 2025 is a Wii remaster, a Wii U remaster, and Metroid Prime 4. and Pokemon Legends ZA. So we have 4 things, but the only 2 things that are dated are remasters, and I'm excited for both of those, especially Xenoblade, but not having a date for Metroid Prime 4 and not having seen Pokemon at all makes it even weirder. Like, Pokemon especially, I think, is the real odd one here. We didn't get any Pokemon Presents after February. We had that huge Game Freak leak in October as well. It was definitely an off year for Pokemon fans, which I think for me maybe also kind of contributes to the weirdness of it all, because normally Pokemon's a consistent thing. Every year I get my Pokemon thing, and even when it's an off year, it's like, okay, that's one off year. Now we're approaching 2 off years of me not playing Pokemon. I think my brain ain't used to that, so maybe that's part of it too. Like, not being able to see Legends EA at all this year was just really weird. The way they announced it was weird. It was a full CGI trailer. They don't really do that ever. Sun and Moon had like concept art, but the fact that they announced it that way and we're not going to see it probably again until February is, it was a weird year. Not to keep repeating myself, but it was just a really weird year. So I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. What do you feel about 2024? Do you think it was a bad year for Nintendo? Do you think it was a good year? Or are you like me and you think it was kind of like a weird one where I don't think it's the worst year of Switch. I think 2020 still has that title, even with titles like New Horizons, Origami King, and Age of Calamity. But it was definitely an odd one. But you can kind of look at that as a positive thing. Because it was an odd one, that meant we got another code and a new Endless Ocean and, Nintendo World Championships and EMEO and a new Mario and Luigi game. Like, some of those are better than others, certainly, but it's still cool to see like these random franchises getting represented when you kind of just weren't expecting them to get new entries on Switch. I think no one was expecting Emio or Another Code or Endless Ocean to get new entries, a year and a half ago. So that's pretty cool. And that's one of those things I appreciate about Nintendo, is that they're just willing to release stuff like that, even if it's not going to sell that well, even if people aren't really going to care about it. It's just like, yeah, well, we're just going to release it anyway, though, which is pretty cool. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo discussions, speculation theories, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and follow me on my other YouTube channel at It's Amiibo. Until next time, folks, peace.